Today's professional world is extremely high-strung. Our capitalist society is built on the shoulders of giants, people like Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos. We look up to these and idolize these infallible titans that forge their own path through this world. But that is basically a lie, because no one is actually infallible. But the belief of infallibility harms basically everyone who works in these similar industries. We show that we get two benefits from these fuck-up nights. The first is why breaking the myth of infallibility will help people come to terms with their own insecurities and understand that in the exact way that the people in fuck-up nights aren't infallible, they too can be infallible. Second of all, it can help them overcome failure, and it can help them come to terms with their own failures in their own professional careers, and therefore aid them in moving on to create more successful careers in themselves. But first, before I get to those 2 points, a short characterization. Beyond the info slide, we know that fuck-up nights are generally done by successful people. Like, the people invited to fuck-up nights aren't people who burned and crashed and burned in their own careers and never recovered and basically went on to live in misery for the rest of their days. These are mostly people who made errors, who suffered from these errors, but who later on went on to find success. So these are the people we are talking about. Okay, on to the first point. About imposter syndrome and insecurity. So today in the everyday workplace, we're exposed to the best and brightest in every place, and that includes both the people immediately around us and the people that we see in general society. First, in people around us, that when we see our group of friends, then we want to be the best we can, so we compare ourselves to our best friends, like our most successful friends, the friends who earn the most, the friends who reach most success in their personal careers. And also we compare ourselves to our most successful coworkers, the people who earn the most among our coworkers, the people who get the most commendations from management, the people who basically we want to be like. The thing is that about those successful people, we don't see their failures and their insecurities. That's simply because of the fact that nobody wants to talk about their own failures and insecurities. It's difficult and it hurts to talk about your own failure, and it needs you to be extremely open to vulnerability, to open up and talk about that with your friends and co-workers, even if these are their close friends. We only see our own insecurities and our own failures, and basically everyone has insecurities. Nobody is completely comfortable. No one has 100% certainty that they should be where they are. Everyone has a tiny nibble of doubt in the back of their mind that they aren't good enough for where they work, they aren't good enough for what they do, and because they only see their own insecurities and they can only see their own failures, because they just don't hear about the failures and insecurities of the people around them, then that makes them feel worse. That makes them feel the imposter syndrome, the feeling that they are only there because other people overlook their insecurities, that other people also didn't see their insecurities. At the moment they will see their insecurities, then they'll understand that we aren't good enough and basically cast us out. The cure for that is first to understand that everyone feels insecurity and everyone feels failure. So, because the moment that we see that successful people, like the people we compare ourselves to, the industry idols around us, our friends and our coworkers, the moment that we know that they too feel insecurity, the moment that we know that they too might feel even imposter syndrome, that they too might feel that they shouldn't be where they are, if we see that everyone around us is like that, then we will feel less out of place. If I think that everyone around me feels like they are a deceiver, then I myself feel less bad for being a deceiver. The thing is, the fuck-up nights, because these people are people who are generally successful, these are people who we do look up to. If I am a professional in the industry and I see someone who I looked up to talking about their insecurity and talking about their failure, that helps alleviate my own and leaves me far less insecure and far more confident in myself, and that is a very important impact just because of the severity of how much imposter syndrome and how much lack of self-confidence hurts people both in their work and also just psychologically. Before I continue to the second point on how it helps them overcome failure, closing, opening. No POIs? Please make a POI. I'd like to engage sometime. Okay, so overcoming failure. Failure is basically soul-crushing and terrible, and that can be any kind of magnitude of failure. It can be if I poured like several years into a project and that project failed, or it can be even if it's a project of weeks and that project didn't make out. I poured like tens to hundreds to thousands of hours into that project. I poured passion into that project. I had high expectations to that project. So when that project fails, if it doesn't succeed, it could be difficult for me to move on, because I saw my own expectations basically be proved wrong. I saw that all the effort I put into the project wasn't enough. So it's not enough that the project will feel like a failure. It makes me, myself, feel like a failure, because if something that I worked so much on, if something that I am that close to fails, it must mean that it failed because I didn't do enough. I did it good enough. I wasn't successful enough to fail. So that hurts people, because first, that self-doubt means they're less likely to move on to new projects. Because if they feel that they aren't good enough, it makes no sense to continue to try on something new, because that will inevitably fail too. Or they could just fear the hurt of the failure again. They see how much it's painful to basically to feel that failure, so they do anything they can to not put themselves in a situation where they fail again. That means that people are less likely to take projects that take large projects. That means that if people had a single good idea, for example, for entrepreneurship, then they are less likely to try to think of a new idea to move on. Try to explain to how Fuckup Nights alleviate that. Anybody? Yeah.
How do you think when I see someone who's very successful and he had a failure in the test, do I learn that he's just like me, or do I learn this amazing person is just dealing with failures in ways that I could never do?
The thing is, and that exactly is what I am currently explaining, when these people talk about the Fuckup Nights, it's not that they say, oh, I did this, I failed, I move on, now I'm successful and rich. They talk specifically about the steps of failure. They walk the audience through how at the moment of failure they felt insecure, how they felt the world was crumbling around them, how they felt that they themselves were a failure and the fact that the project failed was their fault. These people, the people listening to these, the people who felt failures, are just wanting to empathize with someone, because everyone wants to empathize when you feel something terrible. So they empathize with the speakers. They say that the things the speaker felt is exactly what they are feeling. They say that the soul-crushing-ness that the speaker is describing is exactly what they are feeling. So they can jump on that, they can empathize with that, and they can not only see that they aren't that bad themselves, they can see how the speaker learned from their mistakes, they can see how the speaker moved on, and they can take inspiration for the speaker, where before that, without the Fuckup Nights, there's no one to take inspiration from, because if there aren't Fuckup Nights, the only thing that you can compare to are those infallible idols that do not fail. So just because it helps people feel far better with themselves, far more secure in where they are, and it helps people overcome the failures and move on, we are glad to propose.
Okay. I'm going to start in 3, 2, 1. Look, those Fuckup Nights are just not like a support group, okay? We think the comparative here, that if people really want support from other people, and in order to learn how to be involved in what's going on with their life, they still have many other alternatives, okay? They have family that can support them, they can have a psychologist that can support them, okay? They have many other alternatives where they can get that, okay? What I'm going to speak about is how these nights are going on, okay? And why it creates two bad things. First of all, it gives you bad attitude of what is failure and why you should be afraid of it, and then it strengthens like the imposter syndrome for all these people. So further, and beforehand, 2 points of rebuttal, okay? So government comes and tells us, yes, these are the successful people, these are the people who achieved many things, and we agree with them. These are the people who achieved many things, but it doesn't mean that those are the people who are emotionally strength, okay? It doesn't mean that those people are can cope with the things, and just like can open their feelings and put everything on the table, okay? We think this is mischaracterization of these people. They're not coming and telling you all their failures and how bad they feel and open their heart, okay? These are people who are used to present you presentation, okay? They're not using to expose to you their emotion. They are tough people, and they are not to give you like the feeling that you are just like them. Okay? They're just going to tell you, this is what happened to me. And we think that more than that, and this I'm going to speak a little bit more in my analysis, okay? Those are the people who are more likely to have the imposter syndrome. People are more exposed to it, and we don't get this idea that they're just like draw the right conclusion that this is the way I should cope with my failures. Okay, we think this is what this is the comparative. Let's speak a little bit about how these evenings are going on, okay? So we think that people are coming to these evenings, okay? And it's not part of a program, okay? This is not, they don't describe you, here is the track that led me from failure to failure to failure to success, okay? They're just coming and telling you one fuck-up night, one fuck-up event that I had, okay? I had a huge problem with my boss, and maybe I was fired, or maybe all the money that I put in the shares, I just lost it. Okay, it's a night when you just want to share your share the bad things that happen to you. Okay, if you are going to just tell that you were really good at what you, at the end of the day, you were really good at what you did, people are not going to relate to you, they cannot really identify with you, okay, because they now feel that you are just being arrogant on them, okay? So we think that what happens here, at the end of the day, that we don't really create something where we need to in a psychological level, we take a very intimate and very complex idea of how we should relate to failure, and we just reduce it to something very, very poor. Okay, so we think that especially the people who are coming for this, plus people from the high tech, from the academia, okay, people who are having like this imposter syndrome, places where you have a lot of competition, places where it's really, really, really hard to success, okay? Why do we think this is create really a bad situation and bad relationship with failure, okay? Because again, first of all, this is not the concept of the evening, okay? The concept of the evening is just to cry over the bad things that happen to you. What does it mean? It means that if you want to get identified, you just need to say to show how shitty the situation was. It doesn't mean that you have all the growth that's coming out of failure, which is the right narrative that we think that people need, okay? We think that people need to understand that in order to succeed at the end of the day, you need to fail over and over again. You need to apply for a job 1,000 times until you get the job you really want. You need to review your article again and again until it's accepted to the journal that you really want. This is the journey where you become where you become successful. But here, what people think, this person really has a lot of abilities and is really capable and he has a lot of chances, and he has just one flip where he failed against his boss, okay? We think this is the idea of what people really get from this. We think in this moment, okay, you picture failure as something really bad. I don't want it to happen to me because it doesn't lead to success, it doesn't lead to good things, it's just bad things, and it just depicts all failure as the bad things instead of something that we should learn and grow from it. Before I'm going to speak how it strengthens the imposter syndrome, I'll take extension from second house.
Yeah, besides recontextualizing your failure as a lesson that people can then enjoy to get positive correlations, it also raises the knowledge of the risks that you actually are going to face, which seems pretty important so people don't enter business without an understanding of the stakes.
We don't think a support group or a program where you learn all the steps that I need to take risks, and then I need to do that, and then I need to do the second step, and then at the end I'm going to succeed, and sometimes I'm going to fail, okay? We think that it's really important to understand the meaning of this night, and the meaning of this all of us want to cry how bad my life were. What do we think, why do we think this strengthens the imposter syndrome. So with direct engagement, from what we've heard from opening government, okay, they assume, okay, that people are drawing the right conclusion, okay. What they are more likely from psychological perspective to tell themselves is, look, those people are really successful and some bad things happen to them, but they could overcome them, okay? But I learned that they are strong people, okay? They are really open about things and they talk about it, but I couldn't cope with that. And this brings me fear. This brings me, maybe I am, no matter what I did, okay, I'm still not a successful person as they are. We think the moment that people compare themselves the whole time for other people, this is the moment where they cannot grow. What you really need in order to grow by yourself is stop comparing yourself to other people and have a long process within yourself that learn to accept that you are going to fail over and over again until you succeed. You need to do debate 1,000 times before you are going to break the first time for some people. For all these reasons, please propose.
Starting in 3, 2, 1. Basically 1 point, why we are enhancing innovation and why is that important in this debate. But beyond that, just let's engage with what we get open in a position. Hopefully closing a position will expose their extension, otherwise we won't have any way to engage with that. The first thing we get from Schulman in the PY, he says that, oh, you are glorifying those people, you don't think that you will be able. Nothing about that in Hodaya's speech as far as I've heard, but beyond that, we just don't think that this glorification, first of all, it's not comparative, right? Because you still hear about those people who made an exit, you still hear about those people who are immensely successful, but now you also hear the other point of view about the failures. Please know that when people are failing, the news media doesn't cover that. They also tend to not publish that on real time on social media. We think that this is only the only mechanism for actually getting us to know that yes, also successful people are getting fucked up. So even if they are right that people that attend Fuckup Nights think that they have some glorified, it's still less glorified than their comparative that they need to defend, that people still hearing about successful stories without hearing the failures. Then we get from Hodaya the idea that it won't be authentic, and you won't emphasize. We think that it will be fairly authentic. You probably don't go to a Fuckup Night if you don't have a massive failure, right? It's not like somebody didn't smile to me in the lobby. You probably felt miserably, as the info slide already states, so I don't give that example. We think that if you don't show how it affected you emotionally, if you say, oh, I felt like that, but it wasn't a big deal, then you probably don't create any kind of, you lose just credibility. It just doesn't seem realistic. And when you are actually, you need to talk from your heart. Also, we think that you probably have an authentic wish to help people. Because unlike what some debaters sometimes assume, people tend to be nice and want to help. But beyond that, you probably, since you are fucked up and you see the people in the audience, that you know that they came because they also probably have fuck up. This issue also a big matter in their life, because they wouldn't spend a whole night about that if they don't really care about it. You probably have instant empathy for them. You want to help them, you want to support them. So I think that it will be more authentic than what opening a position, giving credit to this night. So why is that important? Because basically, maybe the specific titles and name of the companies is different, but the fear of failure before it happens, and how it feels after the failure happens, how it can be heartbreaking, how it can feel shameful, I think that it's actually a very human thing. And please know that in each night you have we have 4 or 5 speakers, and when they describe very similar emotions, and when you have this emotion, because you are also afraid of failure, because those are probably the people who go there, we think that it's very likely to create some empathy and some authentic thing. About the attack from, or about the risk psychologists, it obviously doesn't respond to any logic of any of the speakers, right? The psychologist didn't make an exit. He didn't like have to like go specific in professional life when we all seem to agree with both teams on top half that we're talking about entrepreneurs, high tech, or academia people. So I think that it's just like a person that didn't experience, he might be good at being a psychologist, but he doesn't have this. Let's talk about closing. You know what? Before that, yes, opening. All right, closing. All right, later on. So basically, as we all agreed, those people are high-tech doctors. Also think that the person who more likely to go for that, for them, failures is a huge fear of failure like that. Yeah? Most of the people would rather go to a movie or go to the theater. People who decide to do that, it's a main issue, specifically in that point of their life, that they actually decided that this is a good enough for them or reason to spend the night on. Why is that? What we think that can be like the professional risk-taking that we are talking about? Probably these people can, if they have like doctor or high-tech, they probably can go to Google and Microsoft and they have good life. But we think they probably have some entrepreneurship in them, that they might start a startup, although it's more risk-taking because it can fail. Most of the startups don't really succeed. Please know that maybe from the perception, from the perspective of the individual, making a startup is not the best thing, but we think that from a collective point of view, we want startup to succeed because another employee of Google or Microsoft doesn't create a huge impact on our society or on our collective. But when you have startups, for example, that creating cheaper commodities that poor people can buy, or like preventing medical issues or car accident, things like that, this is immensely helpful. We don't need to show that everybody that goes to there will be a successful startup. We do concede that most of the startups won't succeed, but it's enough for us one startup to succeed in order to create a huge, massive impact in the society. Please note that those people who are going, I don't know, like hundreds of people like in Tel Aviv and Silicon Valley and New York, like if we have like an immense, about the society, immense impact on that, we think that it's way above everything that opposition might bring. But let's hear what they are bringing. Closing.
Do you believe that the life circumstances of the speaker who failed and then became a successful businessman is similar to that of the average attender of his talk?
Yes. I think that poor people from rural areas probably don't go to those nights. We think that the people that tend to go to there, as already considered by opening opposition, are from the academia, from high-tech. I just don't know why it will be a different biography. But even if they are somewhat like from a better circumstance, we think that the people that already described by I do have a poor idea. No, never mind. I did ask. So basically, here's the thing. We really think that it makes people become more comfortable psychologically with the failures that already happened or with taking new risks. But even if opposition, in the end of this debate, you still believe that they're winning on the clash or where they feel more comfortable, if you do accept that by hearing about failures, that it's not the end of the world, and you can start a new startup, a second startup, sometimes people start a third startup before they are actually successful. When you hear about the immense profit of doing that, when you hear that from people that you now know that failure and the comparative are so glorified because you hear only about the success, you hear only about how they are a genius and so successful, we mean that when we get more startup, we probably get more impact, because I don't care about the marginal worker in Google or Microsoft, but I do care about new startups that improve all society more than I care about bunch of academia people or like high-tech persons that might feel better or worse in some kind of way. For these reasons, I'm very happy to propose.
Dealing with failure is an important skill to master, and it is one of the most important things that a person could do. And the sad thing about those Fuckup Nights is that, contrary to their own name, what they mostly teach you is how not to deal with failures properly. And we would much rather that people that want to feel that feel bad about their own failures talk about it to a friend, to a family member, to a psychologist, rather than go to this fuck-up night and have this being worse. I'm going to do two things. A, what conclusion is actually drawn in the fuck-up night, in which I will consider the two narratives presented as to both by OG and CG. Then we'll talk about the destructive narratives of success as means of happiness that happens in those circuits and how it can be replaced if given our alternatives. Before that, just 2 points of rebuttal. A, we heard that it is very hard to move on from failure, and we completely agree. The question is, what do those people actually teach you about moving on from failure? Because listen to what they told themselves. They say, oh, it was bad for me. But wait, what steps did you take to overcome the failure? How did you change as a person? How did you change your perspective? This is the crucial things for people to move on from failures, but this is not what you get from the fuck-up nights, as they themselves admit. Those are successful people. They never really were that affected by the failure in the first place, and even if they aren't going to. They wouldn't just start to talk about the intensive psychological care that they had and the specific ideas that came up within it. Therefore, it is not useful to understand how to move on from failure. Then they said, oh, but the psychologists of friend did not have such experiences. First of all, we don't know why. The psychologist has a career, your friends have a career, your family has careers, each in their own respective fields probably had failures that you can learn from. But secondly, the important thing is that those people are people who are not obsessed with success and failure. And this is the problem. Those are people obsessed with success and failure, and you're just making their obsession worse on their side. Let's talk about let's actually talk about the destructive narrative because it's more fun. Look. The problem to people in those fields, especially in those fields, is that those are people who are, to begin with, very competitive people, highly motivated, highly skilled, but they are put in a swamp of all the competitive and successful people around them. This is a terrible place to be because usually, for the majority of your life, you could stay on top and feel good about yourself. But once you are in your PhD, once you are in some startup that took all the smart people because they paid them a bunch of money, at that point it's very hard to feel that you're on top, and this is how you get all this imposter syndrome and everything we've heard. We tell you that the problem of those people isn't the fact that they're not successful. The problem of those people is that they feel that success is the measure of their happiness. Now, what happens in those fuck-up nights? Those are, as we've heard, successful people. They are still the role model to how you should be. The way that you deal with failure on their side is to just compensate it with even more successes. This is terrifying. To most people, first of all, this is not a real option. To many people, if they would fail to such extent, they would just get fired and they would not succeed. So it's just not applicable to them. But even if it is applicable to them, it wouldn't make them happy. Even if they would be able to somehow overcome this failure and succeed in some way, it would never be enough for them. And this is the thing that they don't see in the fuck-up night. They see this successful person who failed once, but is still successful, so he's happy, and this is the way I should be, and this is how I should overcome my failures, and this is how people become sad. Instead of our side, where if they will talk to a psychologist, to a friend, to someone who cares about them, who can stop them and say, look, you are over-focusing on success. Find happiness in your life without it, which is what most psychologists and most people who care about you will tell you. This is much better, but this doesn't happen when the automatic thing that you do, the popular thing to do in order to learn how to address success, how to address failure, is to learn from the best and learn from the most successful. This will never happen. This is a worse narrative for them to take, a worse thing to believe in, and we would love that this terrible night would not continue on. But let's talk about what conclusions are actually drawn within the fuck-up night. Before I move on, let's take a POI form first.
Without fuck-up nights, people still tie their happiness to success. The only difference is that in our world, they do it better, and they come with failure better.
No, first of all, as we're going to hear from CG in a second, sometimes they give up. And yes, sometimes they should give up this crazy race. And we say that's a good thing. But secondly, we're saying, if when a person can, like, sure, you will do it to an extent, and at some point you will realize that this is not feasible, because those infallible people are people that you can't learn from, you can't be like, and therefore you can find other ways in your life to be happy. And again, this would be mediated to you by your friends, by your family, by people who care about you. Let's talk about what conclusion is actually drawn. Because OG says, now you learn that those great titans are not infallible. But this is the problem. Everyone knows that Zuckerberg had failures, that people had failures, even big failures. These are not applicable to you because you have never had a $30 million fortune to throw away in a bad deal. So those are not failures that are actually applicable to you. To you, it's just another sign to how powerful those people are, how their incredible character and wit has allowed them to deal with all those terrible failures and become still successful. This is not something I can do. It just puts you under more stress and more strain. But secondly, as OG themselves tell us, people most of the time compare themselves to other people and not to the titans of the industry. So if those other people that you actually compare yourself to, as we've heard from OG, never tell you about their personal failures, then you never get an applicable thing to learn about failure to you, and therefore it doesn't matter. And then thirdly, as I said, those people talk about the professional side of dealing with failures, but not the emotional side. They say, no, but they talk about how hard it is. They are not actors. They're not going to talk to you about what they said to their psychologist. This is way, way too personal. It's fairly uncomfortable to even hear someone talk about it. This is not how Fuckup Nights work. This is very professional, and therefore it's just not effective in the sense of how we learn from failure. Compare that with what we tell you and got no rebuttal. We told you that to do what people mostly take away is saying this incredibly successful people. Yes, he failed in ways I could never dream about, and he overcame in ways I could never dream about. And this is exactly the problem. You attribute this success after all the failure to their eventual, to their immense characteristics and wit, and not to the fact that everybody fails and everything you've heard from OG. So because this is a destructive narrative that enforces more imposter syndrome and puts people on the wrong track to happiness, we're happy to oppose.
English, okay. A minute. 3, 2, 1, go. We mostly agree with opening opposition that people have plenty of ways of dealing with their own personal failures. They can talk to friends, they can talk to psychologists. So we think that what we're losing out when you don't have these fuck-up nights is what the community as a whole is going to gain from other people's past mistakes and what you can learn from it. We don't agree with opening that, with opposition, that there's nothing you can learn from Zuckerberg's mistakes. We're going to explain exactly what you can learn, why you get better startups, and why you get better people doing better stuff inside these startups, which is something that is important. Before that, we're going to talk about a bit of characterization of what this looks like, and we're going to talk about how the whole better business thing. Before that, a bit of rebuttal to opening. So basically, they talked about how it shows success as the only thing that gives you happiness. Sure, this seems very comparative, right? Like on the other side of the house, you only see people who succeed, and this is how they get to happiness. You don't even see the sad sides at all. So we still think that on where have you happiness. Second of all, we just think that like people, as they described, are going into a very competitive field. They obviously care about success, right? Like this is literally what they're giving their lives for. Even if like they without this whole thing, success is literally what they're building their entire self-worth around, without the connection to the failures, because this is what they're investing in. This is where all their money life and this is where all their time has gone into. Of course they want to succeed on either side of the house. Also just like people naturally want to succeed. Like this is something that's very natural. Like, you know, all of us are in a competitive sport for the fun of it because we like the few successes that we do get. So we just think that's it. We think that, yes, sure, some people give up. Some of them actually give up. Some of them try again. We're also going to show why some people give up before they even start because of these fucking up, which is going to be a good thing. basically, they're talking about both opening so far. I've talked about how it's people just talking about how they feel and how this is going to make them feel better. We just think that when we're going to show you why you're probably going to get a bit less failures on our side, which already mitigates that, but also just how there's much other ways to deal with it, and this is something that you get uniquely on our side, which is how you business. Let's talk about the characterization of what this actually looks like, right? So. It's called Fuckup Night, right? Who goes to Fuckup Night and expects to cry? It sounds like a humorous event. It sounds like something funny. It sounds like someone who thinks it's going to be a joke, right? We think that also humor is a really good way to deal with embarrassment and to deal with the kind of thing, which means that it's very likely when you go and you present your story, you're going to want to do it in a humorous way. We don't think you're going to be crybaby. Cool. You think that what it looks like is people you enter, you say what your background is, you say where you stand today, so it's not going to be oh, I'm just crying about all my failures, and you're coming and you're sharing something with the younger generation, you're sharing some failure that you did, you're showing it in probably a fun way, an engaging way, and a humorous way. You probably know how to talk because you're CEO of some successful company, so you have a lot of experience in it, and we think that nobody wants to look like a crybaby. It's just not fun. It's not fun to share it, and you're going to be considered, and we think that this is something that you don't want to do anyway, and yeah, basically we just don't agree with any of their characterizations of how this thing looks. Okay, so thank you. Let's talk about how this influences business. Right? We think that this is a really important group because these are the people that actually follow it. These are the people that are aware of it. This is something that you discuss with your colleagues at work. Maybe you'll go together to listen to this thing. You watch the videos. You discuss all these different things because this is something that's very relevant to your field. We think that this is something that most other people don't watch it, and this is very relevant to your field of work, and therefore you're much more likely to discuss it with your colleagues and something that is influence. So we think that this influences a few people, two different groups. We're talking about business people who are already business people today, maybe not have reached success yet, and we're going to talk about people who have not yet entered the field and are about to. Okay, so today we think that people have some sort of sense of confidence that comes from all the people succeeding, and you think that obviously everyone succeeded before me, so obviously I'm going to also succeed because the only examples I see are of people succeeding. We also think that just on our side, we have more people who are more willing to know when to give up and to know when to cut their losses, right? Because we think in many cases of startups, this is something that you need to know when to do. You need to know that it's okay to fail. We think that today you have the sunk cost fallacy, right? I invested so much in it, so how can I give up because I've already put so much into this, and it's something that it's really hard to give up because you don't want to fail. Tomorrow we think that it's okay to fail sometimes, and you also hear stories about people who, I should have given up ages ago on this specific venture and moved on to something else, and but I didn't because of all these reasons. We also think that people just learn from past mistakes a lot more, and which means they're less likely to do it themselves. We think that there are, unlike what opening opposition said, many examples when you learn when there are common mistakes that are made in startups that these people are going to discuss. If it's bad areas to go into, specific things that cause failure, specific mistakes that people made at different stages of their career, and this is something that you're going to figure out how to avoid these things. We think the scale is much more less important. Mark Zuckerberg, first of all, didn't start off at such a high scale, and second of all, the idea of investing a certain percentage of my money into this thing that then failed is still something I can learn, even if this is not something that is specific. We think that you don't have this today for a few reasons. One, there's just no forum for it. People are embarrassed to share about the things when there's no community that encourages you to do this, that encourages you to talk about this, and we think that people only want to, you think only people want to hear about successes, and you just don't talk about it when there's no specific evening or specific thing that people are saying, hey, come together, tell us your bad story, we want to hear it and we think it's important. Cool. Before I continue, closing.
Do you think that most people who are going to give up, drop out of college, etc., are going to start a business and become the next Bill Gates, or not?
No, but we think that you don't have to be a Bill Gates to be a slightly successful startup, and we think that you're much more likely to be a successful startup when you don't make the same mistakes that everybody's made before you, and just don't talk about it because it's not a culture of talking about mistakes. Let's talk about people who want to get into the business, right? We think that this is going to be really important for them for a few reasons. One, they're going to just know the risks, right? Maybe I'm a young startup person, I really want to open a company, I really want to open a company, I hear you know the statistics that this amount of startups failure, but it's something very intangible to me, right? I think I'm going to be the small amount that succeeds, and I think that I just hear the number. We think that what this evening does is something critical to these people, which is it makes it really, really tangible what this failure looks like. right? It's not just a general number of numbers of people failure. It's like, no, people failure when they go into this area. People fail when they do this specific thing, when they do that specific thing. This makes it a lot more clear to me what this failure looks like, which means I'm much more aware of the risk in a way that I can actually process and actually understand and can actually affect my decision making. What do we think that this actually affects? A, you just know to expect the failure, which already gives you psychologically much easier way to deal with it when it comes, because you know there's a big chance that you could fail. Sometimes it'll be other people's mistakes, sometimes it'll be just chance, and sometimes it'll be your mistake. But either way, you're more able to like deal with the failure in advance. Secondly, maybe you understand that it's not meant for you. Maybe you understand from this that you're a person who really can't handle failure, and therefore it's a good thing for you not to go into this field. And B, you just think you're more likely to actually learn from the mistakes when they do show up. You're like, oh, this is like that example, maybe I shouldn't do this, or I should leave early, or stuff like that. Cool. So what do we think we get? We think that we get A, more startups, because we have more people creating startups for no reason. B, you just get these startups much less risky because you're crowdsourcing your knowledge specifically about the failure, specifically about the thing that failed in a way that is much better. For all these reasons, please propose.
בעיה כשכל היו היו בגמר, אז כזה, אף אחד לא מעודד אותי חוץ מכזה שניים בקהל. Can I? OG is trying to prove here people are now succeeding more because they can overcome their failures. OO really deals with their weakest part and say, oh, it's not relevant to these people and they don't learn anything. But you think that it's their weakest part, and we think that, yeah, maybe some people will not learn, but we think that most people are going to learn things and are going to apply these things in their study. Because they think that, A, we just think that these people who are going to tell their stories most likely going to talk about material that is relevant, that people can relate to, and not talking about things that nobody understands. So secondly, people that suffered failures, really looking for an easy solution, something you can adopt immediately, and we think that these people exactly give them that. Therefore, they're just more likely going to try to follow the things that they are going. What we are going to do is deal with the strongest case of government here and explain why when we are following their consequences, we are going to fail much more, because these consequences are just going to lead us to huge failure. Before I do that, let's start with a short rebuttal to CEO about their case about startups. And it's nice that Yishai is doing this case, because it's completely not comparative, because any professional that tried to do startups can get this information already in the status quo. There are stories of exits still existing in the world. There are podcasts about startups that succeeded. There are economic newspapers that tell the stories of startups. Therefore, I think the professional people who are actually knowledgeable in startups still have this information, still can get all of these things. The people who are going to Fuckup Nights are not the most professional ones that already know a lot about startups. The one who are actually training that for these things, now it's the tipping point to actually do these startups. These are people who don't have this professionality, who didn't read it before in newspapers, and this is what's changed them, that they go to Fuckup Night. So think that Yishai that works in a VC, if somebody told him, I've been in a Fuckup Night, now I want to fulfill my idea because I have the self-secure, Yishai is going to push them away because they're 100% going to fail. We think it's a horrible conclusion for CEO. Let's move to the argument. Why would you think that just people are taking huge risks and more likely to fail? And we think that it is true because we think that if they are trying to follow the consequences these people are telling them, we think that this is exactly what's going to lead them to this risk which they're going to fail. It's two mechanisms here which are extremely important. First is the identity gap between the ones who tell the story and the one who hear the story. Because this thing that the storytellers, the one who actually succeed, and if we're talking about CEO startups, are literally, I don't know, 0.05% of population. We think that are very rare people. They're things that are rare into specific characterization. A, they probably had a huge safety net to leave your job to try a startup, to succeed in something even though you got fired, even though your partner broke up with you. All these things means they have a lot of safety net. Their family supports them. Maybe they have economical safety net. That if they leave their job, they don't work for a few years or few months and then still keep alive. And also second, they were extremely lucky. You need a lot of luck to be in the right place in the right time, to meet with a specific person that gives you the idea that you can cooperate together, be in a specific interview to a specific job job that they need specifically now someone like you. We think that the ones who hear these stories, the likelihood of them being both very lucky and have all of this safeness is almost zero. We think that these people are most likely going to hear these things. So, oh, it's a good idea. Maybe I will leave the job and try to start a new startup. Maybe if I'm finding maybe if my bosses tell me I'm a failure, maybe it's enough to tell them, no, you are wrong, and I can now overcome that and explain to them that my boss is wrong and not me. But we think that for most people, if they are getting fired, we think that they don't have the safety net, they don't have the possibility to move to a different job, they don't have the money to give to their children once they are fired or when these things happen. Therefore, we just think that they take this huge risk because they believe that they have the same things when they don't have. I think it's a horrible consequence. The second thing is just I think that they depict an unrealistic positive depiction of the process and the things that happens to them. Because since you pretty much analyze that, they told us why these people are going to tell jokes, see it in a very positive way. But that more few things that are going to explain why the consequences, the lessons that they teach are lessons that are extremely positive and not realistic. It is true because we just think that one are perceived as being very positive. I think that being a passive in a situation, not committing not making any decision, not making any act, is something that won't put me in a good light. I think that if I'm in this position, I want to show them that I overcome my failure. Therefore, I'm going to put much more emphasis on the actions that I've actually did, the steps that I took, which are things that we think that are things that are extremely positive for me, relating some steps to the consequence when these steps are very positive and it didn't actually lead to that. I think also, secondly, we just think that I've many times believed that others caused the failures and not me, and I'm going to focus on very small things of what I actually did and say things that I didn't do correctly. We think that let's do the comparison to debate. I think that many times, even if I make failure or do good things, I blame the judges for misjudging me right, for not understanding exactly every word that I've said. I think that this is exactly where I just pick and choose things that I've did and blame others for other actions that happen, and therefore I tell only things that are bad consequences and not the ones who actually were realistic. And third of all, just think that people has dissonance cognitive, meaning they try to justify why they did things. We think it is hard for a person to say, I succeeded because I was lucky and I just met the right person at the right time. They're going to try to justify why their actions are the one who caused it. Therefore, they're just going to take very stupid actions that they did, or things that didn't affect anything, and explain, this is what led me to success. This is what made me overcome this failure. What do you think that people are going to do? We think that this is exactly where people are going to say, you can just tell your boss if you did a huge failure that you're just sorry, but now let's go back to work, and that's it, it's enough, and he will forgive you. But we think that in reality, bosses are not going to forgive them just because saying they're sorry, they're doing any extra action, and therefore these people are just going to do these stupid actions, believe they are good, and get fired. We think that maybe they're telling you, you need, okay, even if you have a huge fight with your girlfriend or your parents, you just need to smile and then everything is solved, and it's not what's going to happen because it's a really stupid thing. It's going to focus on actions that they didn't really do, not in the lack and the external things. And before I continue, I'll take talk. Yeah.
The people going to Fuckup Nights aren't people with zero experience. They're professionals from the industry who have experienced failure themselves, and will agree with that characterization.
Yeah, so we think that because they are a part of it, because they're a part of it, we just think that these people are going to see that and believe that these actions are good for them when they're extremely altruistic and plain why. So why do you think it's important? Just get much more failure. People actually taking wrong actions, like leaving the jobs and staying unemployed, like not doing enough things to overcome problems, and that is horrible for them. But I think it's extremely important. Let's compare it directly to what we got from opening, because I think just much more people are affected by failure. Because every depiction that you get from opening opposition about why failure is bad, now we have it 10 times more because we're failing 10 times more, so take their impacts 10 times and this is our impact. Secondly, just think that he showed you much more delta, because the delta between one that suffered a failure to someone who succeeded, we think it's much larger than the one who suffered a failure and felt bad to someone that felt failure and felt very bad. We just think that delta between not feeling the failure at all versus feeling somewhat worse when you get the failure is just much larger delta that we proved. So if you prove to you more failures, just think that you get much more bad feelings comparing to every failure, bad feeling specifically that Ohad gave you. Because of these reasons, we beg you to oppose.
Coach, that you did well.
Thank you.
טוב, אני מתחיל
3, 2, 1. Guys, please, nobody on opposition has actually done, I don't think OG did this either, with what the comparative actually is, right? What happens today is that being a startup guy, being successful in a startup is the holy grail. This is what we're fed in the news, this is what we're fed in the media, this is what we're told by our parents, this is when they tell us that they want us to go and be a programmer, that they want us to work for Google, this is when there's social credit for that. Like, the comparative isn't, oh, people don't care about making a startup, blah, blah, blah. The startup narrative is real, and that's what people are lied to about and told to go and do anyway. So I think that this makes Lior's case much less important because he says, oh, this is going to make a few more people do startups. Newsflash, that's what people do today. Great. I'm going to have 3 paths to victory here. 1, I'm going to explain to you why we think this is going to make far more people successful and avoid a lot of the classic pitfalls that people make, weighing over opening, who tell us that people will just feel more comfortable taking risks without any analysis on why this then means they're actually going to succeed. Secondly, I'm going to explain to you why we think that the kinds of stories that we get mean that we are likely to get the benefits that we have talked about so far. And thirdly, I'm going to explain to you why hearing about how these things go wrong mean that we don't lure people into means we break the false narrative of, oh, go be a startup guy, you're going to succeed, it's going to be amazing, you're going to be a millionaire, which is something we owe all the people who we fed lies to throughout their entire lives, and so we should support Fuckup Nights so that less people fall into this pitfall. Great. Before that, I'm just going to do some rebuttal to Lior. Lior tells us, oh, all this info exists. No, it doesn't. The info, nobody is willing to own up to the fact that they made mistakes because then, when it's reported on the news, it says, this person fucked up and it's his fault. Nobody wants to have that on their record. When people, it's not interesting to people to talk about, oh, all the failures and all the successes. This is where the comparative is, again, super important. The comparative is fireside chats, where successful CEOs basically jerk off saying, oh yes, I was so great at what I did. Look at all these amazing things that I did, and how wonderful, and how I built Checkpoint up from scratch, blah, blah, blah. And all you hear is about how amazing these companies are and how you never had any trouble. This is how people don't want to themselves admit that they did wrong things. No thank you. Secondly, you have very few people who can actually take these risks. Well, A, I've already proved to you why a lot of these people take this risk today anyway, so at least tomorrow they're going to be aware of more of what the risk is, because there's a ton of pressure to make these startups, and obviously the kinds of people who go to this are probably going to be high-tech people, because, like, why else would they be interested in this? Thirdly, all this about, oh, your fuck-ups are going to be shown in a positive light. I think Aliza already dealt with this to a large extent. No, that isn't how that works at all. The whole point of Fuck-Up Nights is your measure of success is how big your fuck-up was. Making your fuck-up seem smaller means you're not doing as good a job of showing how big your fuck-up is. And if there's anything to understand from these people, they're competitive and want to win, so they want to show why their fuck-up was the worst. Secondly, this is a whole process of a story. In order to make it interesting, you have to explain what happened, how it worked, why you failed, why you succeeded, what you learned from this. That's how you show that you actually grew from this as a person. Otherwise, you just told a story about how that was a fuck-up. Haha, that's so cool. Nobody wants that to be the ending. They want to show that they learned something from it and tell you what you can take away from it. Secondly, they also tell us, like, oh, you learn never to be passive. People fuck up by being passive all the time, by not being passive all the time. Making that phone call to the person who you're waiting for the contract from, and that made them know that you were super desperate for them to sign the contract, so then they fucked you over in the contract, is a classic example of this. And this is exactly the kind of thing which people are going to tell you about, so you learn to wait. Great, obviously this is also still better than comparative of fireside chats where people are like, oh, I'm so great, and look at how amazing I am. Cool. Then they say people are going to leave their jobs. Again, not comparative to the fact that loads of people take these kinds of risks anyway without any knowledge. Let's understand how we want this debate from in the first way. So what we explained to you is why people are going to be far more successful, because they can avoid classic startup mistakes. OG tell you people are going to take more risks and feel more comfortable with it. We say why people are A, going to actually succeed. 1, because they can avoid the actual positivity bias that normally goes with the startups. They can actually learn. 2, because they actually learn from the mistakes these people discuss, which are often the same kinds of mistakes. Oh, you didn't manage your cash flow properly, because who the fuck thinks about managing that at first? Nobody, because you have no idea what you're doing. It's the first time you're going into business. It's going to be one of the biggest mistakes you make. You learn about the fact that you thought that you had a cool idea and you decided to put all your life savings into it, and then you realize that, wait, actually, it turns out that you have to give a ton of money to a ton of your equity to investors, and the first startup is never going to be the one that actually returns your amount of money initially, and so you've got to make at least 2 successful startups before you can be a millionaire. You learn all sorts of things like that. Notice this is going to be more important than what OG brought us, because it's not clear how many more people are actually going to be able to take a risk, and also it's not clear why the actual act of taking risk is successful. What we explained to you is why, 1, these people are more likely to actually succeed, which then means that, okay, we actually see more startups at the end of the day, but 2, because this explains why these people are justified in taking this risk, and so more of them are going to actually be willing to do that because they know what they're doing, because they have actual more knowledge, because they know, likely that they have more chance of success. Finally, we also explain why these people won't be as screwed over by the failure, because they know when to quit, because they know not to fall in love with their idea and things like that, which means that we also mitigate the actual harm done to them. They're not going to put all of their life savings into it. They're going to put a smart amount of their life savings into it, because if they don't, they could lose everything.
Finally, we think this outweighs them on the breadth of impact and explains why we likely don't get as many bad things as OG, and so we think we're above OG. On this way, we think we're above both of openings, basically, both of closings, just because we think that we do accept the weighing from Eyal of like, oh, startups are super important, they provide a lot of benefit to the people who actually get things from them, they provide a lot of work, they're a high income, high upside thing, so the people actually creating them, if they're successful, are likely to become very rich from this, and so it's just a good thing for these people to be able to do more of and make that choice. Before I continue and explain the other things, who should I take? I'll take that.
When a successful person casually jokes about failures that to you would be terrifying and paralyzing, it makes you feel even worse. A psychologist would help you to really deal with failures, successful people won't.
Great, but like, okay, but you never proved why people actually go to psychologists, which I just, like, there's a huge stigma against it. I don't think that most people see psychologists on a regular basis. Like, I have no idea why these people are going to go to psychologists on the comparative. And two, I also think that this takes me to the third way I said, about how hearing the way, when somebody jokes and says, yeah, I lost $30 billion that day, ha ha ha, and you say, wait, fuck, you can lose $30 billion in a day? I don't have $30 billion to lose. This is exactly when you understand the scale of what you're facing. That if you fuck up, you're not just going to lose some of your money in your savings. You're going to lose your house, you're going to lose everything you ever own. And that means that the kinds of people who aren't built for startup life, who the startup narrative tells them that they should be doing this, and this is the kind of risk they should be taking, and they're told to buy into it, and say, wait a second, this can go wrong, and when this goes wrong, I'm going to be royally screwed, and I'm not going to do that. And we owe these people this information because we lie to them throughout their entire lives, and we tell them they should be doing this thing, and when we actually tell them, wait, no, this can go wrong, and these are the ways that can go wrong, and as Aliza said, we make it salient to you, and you understand how bad it's going to be. This means that you take this risk in a way that is not stupid. And that's like super important and a big reason to support Fuckup Nights, because we give this information to people who otherwise won't have access to it in a way that they otherwise won't understand, and so that we prevent them from making these helpless people from making this mistake. Finally, I think that just on our characterization, the way we explain how this actually looks means that we likely don't get a lot of the harms that OO and CO actually want, right? The way this looks is because it looks like a story, because it looks like people telling the process of what happened and sharing throughout their experiences, it means we likely don't get the doom and gloom of like, oh, I can never learn anything, because people are human, and when somebody says, oh, I made this mistake, oh, I didn't read this person correctly, it's something that I can still learn from, I can still understand. For these reasons, we beg you to propose. Ready? Okay. I'm pretty tired. I forgot how tiring 5 rounds a day physically is, so I hope it will be quick. I'm going to talk about 3 things. First of all, how these talks are likely to look like. Secondly, am I likely to learn the right things from these talks? And thirdly, how it is going to affect the actions of people and cause more or less failures because of it. Before that, just 2 external points of rebuttal. First of all, Yishai kind of confused me, because that sounds, and I hope he didn't, but it sounds like he says that people will do less startups because of this motion. This is extremely weird because OG has said the opposite, and also Aliza has said the opposite. So I think telling that people will stop taking the risk just contradicts the rest of the gov bench. The second thing that I'm confused about is all of those people talking about how everyone who comes there already knows everything, probably has a large safety net, probably knows everything about the world. So first of all, even between people who go to high-tech or academics and stuff, there are different sets of people. Many of them come from poorer backgrounds, many of them don't have a lot of experience. We think that those are also affected by this talk, and even probably more likely to come to these talks. But secondly, this motion is about the rise of those phenomena. So even if OO explains that this is what happens today, probably in the rise of those things, it will be accessible to more people who are not only the most successful people on both sides of the house. Okay, so how those talks are likely to look like. OO are telling us that the talks will probably be on things that are not relevant to me and feel very much disconnected to me, like losing $30 million a day, and the talks will be only on the failure and not on the growth, so I'm not going to gain anything from that. Governments are then responding with 2 things. First of all, they are telling us that it will be on things that are relevant, that you are going to grow from that. Secondly, they are telling us that it will be an accurate description of what's going on. So on the first thing, how do we say it in the PC way today? I'm going to take governments on their strongest side and think, like just close my eyes and think that not everyone is going to talk about losing $30 million because not everyone has lost $30 million. So we think that probably there are also, especially on the rise, more cases that are on things that are relevant to you, so I'm going to handle this more stronger case by the governments. But I'm not going to agree with them that this description is going to be accurate. Why is that? Because they assume that if you talk about your failures, you are probably talking about things that are accurate and describing what really happens to you and want to help people. Lior is actually explaining to you why, even if you have good intentions, you are still very likely to describe this with less accuracy. Why is that? First of all, because you want to say that you were active about things. You want to show that you have made actions that either caused the failure or got you out of the failure and tell the story about yourself, although in many cases it was more because of your lack or safety net and not because of your actions. Secondly, because you are tending to blame others instead of yourselves. So even if you accept that this is a huge failure, you will still say that it was because of your partner more than because of you. But thirdly, because you are in a cognitive dissonance, which means that if you don't really know how to explain why something really happened, which most people don't on most things in their life, you will probably still find some reason, even if it's not the right one, and logically explain, like any debater who gets a side, why this thing is the one that causes this failure. Which means that it is going to be an inaccurate description of the problem and the solution. The only response we got from CO to this, literally not responding to any mechanism, is saying, no, but you want to tell us about something big and what can we learn from it. This is not engaging with their case. You might talk about big things, you want to have some way to learn from it, but it will be the wrong lessons. This is what we have told you. So let's go on to whether you will get the right ideas from that. So obviously, all of these analyses that I just talked about mean that it is very likely that first of all, you won't understand what are the real causes for the problems, what is the likely solution, and secondly, and even more importantly, you will probably place too low a weight on external causes such as luck, such as safety net, such as being in the right place in the right time, although in many cases this is the most important thing for success or failure. But secondly, even if you don't buy any of that, the actual analysis we got from CO on that is really not that strong. What they're saying to us is that if you hear past stories, you will learn the right consequences for the future. So let's tackle their startup example of learning startup mistakes. First of all, it might be true that putting money in the medical industry or starting a startup there 10 years ago was a bad idea, but after COVID is a good idea, so learning which industry to go to is just the wrong thing to do. Secondly, it might be true that 5 years ago, it was very hard to raise money, so you needed to do a lot of things before you raise your first dollar, like building a prototype, but today it's extremely easy, so you don't need to do those things, and learning these things would be a wrong thing to learn. Thirdly, as they're saying, you might be important to know that the cash flow is something you need to handle with. This might be true 10 years ago, but today maybe the VCs tell you how to do that, or you hire a CFO from the first day and don't do it as the CEO. So we say that just learning things from the past could very likely be on the wrong directions because the market changes, because stories only reflects one story and not the whole like industry or something like that. So we think that it's not going to cause the good kind of learning, even on their best case scenario, if you buy that this is an accurate description. So now let's go on to how it impacts the actions of people. But before that, I'll take first.
Yes, we should probably want people to continue trying and failing, since the few successes make it worth it both personally
Great,
and socially.
so I'll deal with that very soon. So first of all, let's talk about how it's going to affect people's action. Because all are telling us that it's better to go to a psychologist and stuff like that. Governments are telling them that it's not comparative, not mutually exclusive, so let's move on. But what do we think are the bottom line of both of the governments? I'm going to learn more what happened, and therefore I'll fear less of failing, and therefore I will take more risks and we'll be able to do things in a smarter way. What is our arguments for that? First of all, you will learn the wrong lessons, and therefore you will likely make more mistakes and not less mistakes. Secondly, you are going to think that if you make a mistake, you are going to be able to get out of it easily, although for most people this is not the situation. We think this causes people who want to be able to succeed to take more risks and more likely fail, which will most probably harm their life significantly. We think that this is an enormous impact on many people's life. It is going to actually make them lose their jobs, start a failing business, lose their safety nets, bets like the ones they have, we think this is extremely bad and wins off the debate completely. But what is the only thing that OG does have against that? Maybe having startups generally is a good thing. This is extremely uncomparative. First of all, as Yishai told us, there is extreme amounts of money and interest today for people to start startups. We don't know why starting more startups is a thing that is missing. We just think that probably there are enough startups today. People can be also beneficial as a Google workers or academias. But secondly, we think that if those are the people that are more likely to fail, then this money that goes to them could, on the other hand, go to people who would have succeeded with better chances, which then creates more the positive impacts on the society. So we think we don't have a big impact for the society, but we have a huge impact for those people. From all of those reasons, very proud to oppose.